How is everyone? Good, yeah. We're almost there. Thanks coming to my talk, detecting influence campaigns across social media platforms. And a little bit about myself. My name is Zhou Han. I'm currently the founder of SafeLink Network. We build AI-based technologies to help journalists and security analysts to understand anomalies on social media platforms. And I was a student not a long time ago. I graduated from NYU PhD in data science program last year. And I basically did my thesis on tracking malicious URLs across social media platforms. So that's what got me interested in this problem. And also during my PhD, I was lucky enough to work at different anti-abuse teams and trust and safety teams at Twitter, Google, and Amazon, detecting different bad actors, bots, and malicious softwares. So all those experiences together basically motivated me to do what I'm doing now. So today, the main topic is about tracking coordinated campaigns on social media platforms. And I want to first just give you an overview of what are some examples of coordinated campaigns and why it is difficult to detect them. And then I will introduce a tool we have been building called Information Tracer to basically collect data and analyze data across social media platforms. And then I will show you 3 case studies that we have been working with our partners to understand different campaigns. So actually there are lots of different types of coordinated campaigns, and here I put them into 3 categories. So the first category is basically political campaigns like propaganda in diverse countries. So we have been tracking those campaigns in Brazil, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Moldova, so many countries in the global south. So actually any country that there is an election coming up or there is some regional conflict, you will see those type of campaigns. And another type of coordinated campaign is like hate speech, targeting different celebrities or human rights activists. So we have been studying campaigns against Amber Heard, who is an actress in the US, and Meghan, who is Duchess of Sussex. And also, of course, there have been lots of campaigns to spread scam and fraud on social media platforms. And they usually hide behind some content about crypto and gambling. So why are those campaigns very challenging to detect? So let's go back a few years when I was still a PhD. So I was here on the lower left side. So I was a researcher, but I was not happy because like detecting campaigns is a very hard problem, especially across platforms. So we need multiple parties to work together. So one is a platform who should be willing to share data. And also researchers, they are developing methods and algorithms, which is good, but also we need journalists or security analysts who have the domain knowledge or who are local experts of the regional politics to be able to interpret and analyze the data. So at the beginning, basically I found that those groups, so everyone is working in silo, which make it hard to analyze those campaigns. So what I did is, so this is during my PhD, I started to develop this system called Information Tracer. And I also published a paper about it titled An Automatic Framework to Continuously Monitor Multi-Platform Information Spread. So the basic idea is to have one system to be able to collect data from across social media platforms, aggregate different data sources, and analyze them to find patterns of suspicious information spread. So this is the system I've been using, and all the analysis is based on basic data collected from Information Tracer. And again, the motivation that I'm creating the system is because when we talk about detecting fake news or misinformation, I think nowadays it is very difficult to detect just based on the content because content is just not enough. So you always need more context around how the news spreads, like who are the actors spreading them, and when is it shared from one platform to another. So basically, when we created this tool, we try to make sure it works across platforms and it works across different languages, and it can generate different coordinated kind of indicators of coordinated behavior. So how information tracer works in someone's workflow is the following. So if you are a journalist and you find a suspicious hashtag or a news article online, you can basically put the keyword into the search, and then we connect with different platform APIs. So right now we cover Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Reddit, and YouTube, so 5 platforms. And then what we'll do is we aggregate data that match the query, and then we visualize the results and share the intelligence back with the journalists. So we're not building like a machine learning classifier. We're not telling people this is true or not, but we're basically building an engine to give people enough context so they can quickly make decisions. So this is kind of how we work with different partners because this is a complex problem. So on one hand, on the right hand, we work with lots of research universities in Hong Kong, Mexico, New York University. So we together develop methods or capabilities to detect different campaigns. And on the left-hand side, we have to partner with the basically newsroom or humanitarian agencies like Internews, the Centennial Project. So those are the people who actually can take the intelligence and write a report and basically intervene on the local people who are exposed to those type of campaigns. So next, I will walk you through a few case studies that we have been doing with our partners. So the first is about tracking political campaign. And so here is a map of basically some of the countries we have been working with, and a lot of them are in the global south. So for example, we are studying with a university in Mexico about the upcoming election. So Mexico will have a national election 2024. And also in Brazil, we have been studying kind of what happened during the January 8th riot. And in Nigeria, they just had an election earlier this year. And also in Ethiopia, there is a region called Tigray, and that region has had conflict with the Ethiopian government, and there has been kind of misinformation and different campaigns on social media networks. So we basically work with different local agencies to understand what is going on. So in this case study, we'll look at Brazil. And I will use this example to basically illustrate how we analyze the conversational network, like what's the method we use and how we visualize the network. So in particular, what we want to understand is there is this hashtag called BrazilianSpring that was shared actually way before the riot that happened on January 8th. And you probably have seen this on the news. So the background is in Brazil. This year on January 8th, 2023, there was a riot and lots of people basically stormed the capital at Brasilia, and this is a picture of the day. So a very bad situation. So we want to understand how social media played a role and who was behind those messages. So basically what we did is we first gather all the data that have this hashtag BrazilianSpring. And then we construct a network where there are two types of nodes. So some nodes are users from different platforms, and some nodes are hashtags or URLs that those users share. And we connect the user with the hashtag if the user has shared the hashtag. So this way you can basically understand and visualize who is sharing what at any given moment. So this network, so this graph is the very beginning of the network. So basically there were just two Twitter users sharing about Brazilian Spring, and the very first tweet we were able to trace is from this person called Rafael Fontana, and he just said the Brazilian Spring is just beginning on November the 1st. So that's about 2 months before the riot on January 8th. So we did some investigation of who is this person, Rafael Fontana. So basically, I think on the profile he claims to be a journalist, but he's been just constantly sharing very questionable content. So for example, in one tweet, he was talking about the riot in the United States and saying that citizens were being invited by police officers to enter the Capitol. So that's the type of message he spreads, and I think that gives you an idea of his reputation. So basically, he's the very first user that shared. And then, based on our visualization, just a few days later, on November 6th, this narrative basically spread to more platforms, so Facebook and Instagram. And when we look at some Facebook pages, the content also become more violent. So people are calling for protests, like either stay the homeland free or die for Brazil. So basically becoming more violent. And basically by the end of December, the conversation, the narrative just spread across social network platforms. And this is a final network, so it just becomes very dense with lots of users. And if you kind of visually look at the graph, there are some centroids. So those are some of the key narratives that people are repeatedly sharing. So those are hashtags like Brazilian Spring, Brazil was stolen, Brazilian censorship. So that gives you an idea of what people are talking about. And another way we want to analyze the graph is not only what people are talking about, but who are talking about and who are the principal actors. So one way we can identify them is we can start to remove some edges that are not very important. And what I mean is, so because each edge means someone shared something, and that usually comes with an interaction, like number of retweets or number of likes. So we can remove edges with a low number of interaction. So we can set a threshold. And what happens is you will have a more reduced graph, like the one on the right. And this graph is more analyzable, so you can identify some key players in the network. So basically those are the principal actors who kind of receive high interactions. And we also actually look into those accounts, trying to figure out who they are. And I mean, it's kind of tricky because even today, I mean, I talk to people in social media companies and journalists, but I think it's very hard to know if those accounts are operated by real people or by some other third parties. But if we just read their profile, they seem to be people who are diasporas of Brazil. So they claim to be Brazilian, but they live outside of Brazil, like in other countries, like United Kingdom. So those are the principal actors who kind of grow the conversation. So what we can learn from this campaign is, I think one very interesting dynamic is it seems that it started with some foreign actors, or at least accounts that's not in Brazil. So those voice online can actually lead to later kind of domestic violence or domestic protesters, and there will be offline consequence. And also another reason that why those messages are prevalent is social media platforms. I think they just don't have enough resource to investigate all those campaigns in the global south or in different countries because the language is different, the cultural context is different. So as a result, those false claims are just left unchecked. And another very tricky situation is, so I was basically talking to the trust and safety team at Facebook, asking them, what do you do? And they said, also here, there is a very high bar of freedom of speech. So how do you better define what is free speech and what is harmful content? I think that's also something that maybe regulators can help. So with this, actually, is a good segue to our second case study. So this one is about tracking coordinated hate speech campaigns. And so the background story is, actually in 2021, I was not studying this problem originally, but I received an email from basically a human rights activist, and she somehow discovered Information Tracer, which is a tool I built. And she said she was using it to study kind of bot campaigns against Amber Heard, who is an actress in the United States. Yeah, and that's when we started to kind of together investigate what is going on. So just to give you the background story, if you don't know, so Amber Heard, she has been in a legal lawsuit with her ex-husband, Johnny Depp. I won't go into that. That's very complicated and lasts many years. But what happens is during this time on social media, there has been a kind of a huge amount of hate speech against Amber Heard. And it's not clear if those are authentic or coordinated. So that's something basically we want to understand. And why we are interested in this problem is because, and here I'm quoting from Amber Heard herself, and she said to NBC News that the vilification I have faced on social media is an amplified version of the ways in which women are re-victimized when they come forward. So we can say it definitely has a real impact to the target of hate speech. So how we studied is, to be fair, we did a comparative study because we found there are people on social media who support Johnny Depp, and they will use hashtags like justice for Johnny Depp, Amber Heard is a liar, and so on. And there are also people who support Amber Heard, and they will use the reverse hashtag like justice for Amber Heard and Johnny Depp is a liar. So basically, we use Information Tracer to collect posts from different platforms with those hashtags. And we look at different metrics to understand, is there anything coordinated? So one thing we found is in terms of volume, there is a high volume of pro-Johnny Depp messages. I mean, that in itself is not suspicious, but we later also find basic coordinated behavior of those accounts that I will show you later. So first of all, in terms of volume, like the interaction and the likes, the one on the left is the pro-Johnny Depp campaign. And so here is a graph where we show the cumulative number of interaction on each platform. So the x-axis is the timeline, and the y-axis is the cumulative interaction, like likes or comments on different platforms. So the graph is like ever increasing, and each circle is a post, and the bigger the circle, the more interaction that post has. And if you look at the y-axis, so the Johnny Depp one is like 60,000, and the pro Amber Heard one is only like 2,500. So that's the difference in volume. And what's more interesting is the network behavior. So here we basically build the same type of network, so we connect accounts with the hashtags that they share. And what we found is the Johnny Depp fans, so they have a pretty kind of tight cluster of accounts. And those accounts, so here again, it's very tricky because I basically talked to the people at Facebook Trust and Safety, and I asked them, are those authentic, are those bots? And they also couldn't give an answer because there's just not enough signal to tell if they are controlled by the same entity or not. But it seems like they are different fan accounts, and they say they originated in different countries like Italy, Brazil. So that's one behavior, kind of similar but not identical profiles. And what's also very suspicious is the hashtags they have been sharing. So they share lots of, co-share lots of hashtags with similar patterns like Amber Heard is a liar, Amber Heard is finished, and so on. So actually this is not the end of this investigation, because we later find very similar campaigns targeting other people. So one is Meghan Markle and her husband, Prince Harry. And basically very similar type of hashtag, like Meghan Markle is a liar, and is shared over and over on different platforms. And this time we found YouTube is actually a top platform that is kind of weaponized to spread those harmful content. And when we look at those YouTube channels, it's just all kinds of people generating those harmful content. So then we start to ask why are people doing that? And we believe the basic reason is they just want to monetize hate speech. So it's kind of a clickbait. So according to some statistics, like YouTubers, if you have 20,000 views per day, then you can earn an estimated monthly income of $1,000 US. So basically there is always this incentive of more traffic. And here I'm quoting Chris Bryant, who is a UK member of parliament. And he spoke to the parliament that it is becoming, so here 8 it refers to some low quality newspapers in UK, I think. So it is becoming their richest clickbait thing. It drives viewing and earns advertising income. So yeah, I think unfortunately why this happens is because of this whole incentive of traffic and advertisement revenue, and people will just keep generating. And without a very clear guidance from regulators, like platforms, they couldn't really enforce. So that's basically something we have been tracking. So the last case study, because we're in a security conference, so how can we not talk about scam and malware? So basically you can also identify basically malicious URL on social media platforms if you know what to search for and how to aggregate your data. So now we will imagine a different scenario. Let's say you are a security analyst and you want to identify basically some malicious URL or some malicious content. So the first step is you basically come up with some keywords that are associated with those suspicious posts. So in this example, so basically here we just have a very simple heuristic, which is, let's say during the World Cup, there are lots of posts about free live streaming, and then someone will share a link, but sometimes when you click the link, it ends up being redirect you to another malicious website. So in order to capture those links, basically what you can search is free live streaming, and then you can get data from different social media platforms, And then similarly, we can build this conversational network. So here, actually in the very center, there is a hashtag, so that one is live stream. And then there are different accounts talking about live stream and some other topics. And what we identified is on the bottom left, there is a big cluster of Facebook pages. And so what they are doing is called hashtag hijacking. So they will share free live streaming, but they will also share many other hashtags like betting, online gambling, and so on. And because they are sharing like all in the same manner, in the graph, they just look very coordinated, and it's very easy to identify from the rest of accounts. So basically, once you see those type of clusters of accounts, what we did is we just extract all the URLs from the post from those Facebook pages, and you can also sort them by occurrence, so you can kind of tell what domains they are trying to push. So here you can find basically very suspicious domains like dana69.click and so on. And once you have the URL, we just put it into a sandbox analysis engine like VirusTotal, and we were able to identify just different Trojan malware like Android downloads, because usually in the Facebook post, people are saying, oh, you need to download this app in order to do something, but the app will contain different malicious code. So to sum up, we can basically build this type of almost automated malware discovery pipeline. So basically, as long as you have a heuristic, like some keywords, then you can start the collection and then look at the graph analysis, find coordinated accounts, those clusters, and then you can extract entities from those accounts and do some further investigation. So basically, this gives you a way to filter and narrow down the types of assets you need to analysis, because otherwise there are just too many on social media. So this will be my last slide. So in terms of what you can do, I think there are a couple of things. So first, if you use social media platforms and you see a hashtag or URL or keyword that you suspect are shared by coordinated actors across social media, then you can use information trees or similar method to collect and contextualize what is going on. Or if you know a URL or hashtag that is fake or harmful, and you want to understand how it was shared on social media, you can also use the tool or those type of method to understand the spread patterns. So basically, as long as you have an idea, like a keyword you want to search, you can probably identify interesting patterns on social media. And with that, that's the end of my talk. Yeah, thanks for listening. Yeah. Is there anyone have questions?
Hi. Yeah, this is super interesting. Maybe a really quick one. For most of this, it's obvious what the motivation is in the ecosystem of disinformation. But I'm not really familiar with the financial incentives of social media platforms other than YouTube, where you talked about the monetization. Is that also the motive for the ones on like Twitter and other platforms, or are those mostly like driving people to YouTube where it's more easily monetizable? Where does the money come from in those kind of campaigns?
Yeah, I think hate speech, on YouTube is monetizable, on Instagram also monetizable. If they have enough followers, they can run ads. I think Twitter, like those scam, they just abuse the platform because it's free. They can generate lots of accounts. Yeah, and I think for those political campaigns, I mean, sometimes it's also not all misinformation, because what we do, like with the university, like in Mexico, is also try to monitor those elections and try to identify if there's some anomaly. So yeah, in that case, we also just like monitor and say when it's something different. But that may or may not be misinformation, or sometimes it's just like grassroots movement. Yeah.
I had a quick question. So my question is I currently work at an entertainment company, and one of the things that we're actually responsible for is monitoring for these sort of campaigns and stopping them as they start to occur. That way we are aware of like any physical threats. My question is do you think this technology could be used to detect these trends like before they become a widespread issue?
Okay. I think it's hard to detect them at the very beginning, like at the genesis, because you need at least some accounts to share something similar to be able to have a pattern, right? Like to be able to have a coordinated network. But I think we can try to detect very early. I think maybe we can talk about more. Yeah, I'm not sure like how early it can be, but I think as long as there are a few accounts doing something similar, yeah, we should be able to kind of group them in the network. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You mentioned Tigray on your initial slide, but maybe didn't have time to go into the use case. Could you just briefly describe what was the campaign that you were tracking for Tigray, and if there's a place to find more information about it, what you did done?
Yeah. So actually, I mean, I was amazed because I have this system, and then people from different countries just somehow discover it, and they start to search like in their local language or what is going on. Yeah. So I think for Tigray and Ethiopia, there has been a conflict between Tigray and Ethiopian government, and I was basically talking to some diasporas of Tigray, so people in the United States, but who originally come from Tigray, and they also care about what is going on. So basically, I was having conversation with them and trying to come up with some like hashtags to monitor different narratives, because there are people who support Tigray, there are people who support like the unification of Ethiopia, and there's no black and white. But in the end, I think it became very hard to understand what is actually going on. So actually, that project is still in progress. And if you have some other resource, I would also like to know, because one challenge we have is like I work with diasporas, but in the countries in like Africa, especially those with conflicts, it's very hard to get people on the ground to tell us what is going on, like to verify if something is true on social network. Yeah. So we have been having difficulty getting people on the ground. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I was just wondering, how are you dealing with the API changes from Twitter and the enormous cost increase that just kicked in?
Oh, yeah, that's a very good question. So, and I was basically coding for the past few days because of the API change. I think in the long term, so the information tracer, or the way we offer the platform is kind of like an infrastructure, like an analyzed infrastructure as a service, right? But the data will come from users. So you give me in a secure manner, your Twitter credential, right, or your other platform credential, and we do the same analysis, but we are using your API key, so there is no problem with data ownership. So basically, we just can change the API key, and we can avoid those legal issues. Yeah, so that's our plan long term. So basically, decouple data ownership from the analysis infrastructure. But otherwise, like data will always remain a risk for those type of analysis. Yeah. Other questions? Okay, yeah, if not, yeah, thanks for coming. I hope you enjoy the conference. Yeah, thanks.